Welcome back. So Doctor, we ended with this point about the sanctity of life. Isn't that the underlying normative position that you're coming from?
Absolutely.
That you believe that not even an individual has the ultimate say over his or her own life. Is that where you're coming from?
Look,
I think I'm going to ask Taryn the same question.
Yes, you know, the thing is, we don't often say it because it's an assumption. The trust of a doctor and a patient is based on the fact that that patient assumes that the doctor will never do anything to harm him, would never do anything to hasten his death. So it's an unspoken trust.
Are you
do you know that people in Holland
from time to
don't
time
trust the doctors? They have cards to say, if I fall and I'm unconscious, do not euthanize me. It's prevalent in Holland, and it could happen here.
There's a lot of studies about Holland which seem to say it works pretty well. More than 4,500 people a year go that route, and my research doesn't seem to indicate that it's... I mean, of course there are problems, but...
But you see, it's not just older people, it's now children. Do you know that in Holland and Belgium, if you're a 12-year-old, you can give consent to end your own life?
No, in Holland you can't. You've got to get your parents between 12 to 16.
Well, not according to my literature.
Well, then I think you better check the act.
In other words, the slippery slope has included...
I don't know about Belgium. It may well be right there. But I checked on Holland this morning.
Belgium.
And let me put this to you. Let's assume that was the case.
Yeah.
That it was the parents who decided to do that. I mean, if you're sitting there with a child who's in unspeakable pain and you've come to the dreadful conclusion that there's nothing more to be done for this child, and the doctors agree, and there's a review panel of doctors, all of whom agree, why would you say that in that situation it wouldn't be right?
You know why? And I'm going to quote a very controversial subject here, and that is the AIDS epidemic. Before we had treatment for HIV, parents in countries, in our own country, walked away from their children because there was no treatment for them. If you were to legalize or to assume that that was the norm, you would not pursue research for HIV medication. You would not be driven to maternal child prevention, which has saved millions of lives.
Are you suggesting that there's been less research in places like Holland than otherwise would be the case?
With HIV, yes. Because
Really?
we have
And
a
what
legacy,
evidence
a
do you
very
have-
shameful legacy.
What evidence do you have that in Holland they would have done less research on HIV because of euthanasia?
Because they don't have HIV patients of the same magnitude that we have.
So we don't have any evidence about it, it's just speculation.
We are the epicenter for HIV, and we have a very shameful legacy of children and people being thrown away and dropped down a hole because they had HIV.
So Helena,
Yes,
what about that? I mean, isn't that a problem?
Yes.
They believe in
That in fact, if we do have euthanasia, particularly in relation to children, terminally ill children, we may well in fact engender a culture of carelessness, thoughtlessness, or even worse. That's, I think, what's being suggested.
Yes. We have enough
Sorry,
demoralization.
I appreciate it. I've got the point. I wanted to give her a chance. Yeah.
I think going back to your own point, that abuse of something doesn't invalidate a law. It's getting better at implementing a law. And I want to go to the Constitution and Section 10 around human dignity, and Section 11 around life and freedom and security. And it seems to me that our law is out of sync. And
Although most countries don't have this, do they? I mean, we've been citing European countries, but how many countries have an active euthanasia piece of legislation?
we're on about 8 at the moment.
8.
Yeah.
What about the right to life in our Constitution that should protect all human beings, including the preborn and the elderly?
I understand that. What I'm troubled by is you've made a lot of arguments which I think one has to think very carefully about. I suppose what I'm really asking you is, can you not envisage cases where there's no right to life because, well, there's a right to life, but there's also a right to autonomy. And I can decide, like Dr. Ambrosini did, to end my life because I cannot bear the pain anymore. And I want somebody to, in a sense, assist me in this. Because I just cannot. I'm conscious, I understand. I'm sitting here and I'm saying to you, I'm 100% compos mentis. Try as many doctors you like, come back tomorrow, the next day, and next month. I'll still have the same position. And the next month, I've still got the same position. And you say no. What gives you the right to tell me no?
And yet we've got cases like Andrew Lloyd Webber who wanted
Well, that's
to die.
depression.
He had filled out
I'm
the
not talking about
papers and then he
depression.
changed his mind.
I'm talking about assuming that you've got a panel of doctors who diagnose the person as being absolutely beyond
What happens when you legalize
Ambrosini
murder?
was
Voluntary
in a-
euthanasia always leads
So
to
but
involuntary
why should you,
euthanasia.
I'm
Taryn,
sorry,
have
it
a right
doesn't.
over me?
It does. It's happened in Holland. It's happened in Belgium. It'll happen here too.
In Washington, if you could let me finish a sentence, 50,000 deaths per year in the last 3 years. That's 150,000 deaths. 255 people have requested prescriptions, and of those 255, only 60 people decided to use the prescriptions. That is not evidence of a slippery slope.
So
and
you haven't provided any information about Holland or Belgium, though, where there is this slippery slope.
I looked at the statistics on Holland and Belgium, and I could not see your figure work. I could see you making assertions,
report in the Canadian Medical Association of the 120 nurses who admitted to euthanizing patients without their consent.
But now, why is it, what I'm troubled by that, I think that's a very worrying problem. But is that enough to trump the principle? Because I come back to your point, what you're really ultimately saying, which is a moral position, is you believe in the autonomy.
Well, it's an amoral position.
Why is it an amoral position?
Well, you're trying to force your amorality onto us.
No, just hang on,
to those who don't want euthanasia in this country.
I believe in compassion.
Well, so do I, but I don't want an amoral position
Why
forced
is her
onto
position
us.
amoral when it basically says the trump here is individual autonomy? That's a moral position. Yours, on the other hand, is sanctity of life. What we're dealing with is two moral claims. You can't say one is amoral and one is moral. The question which you've got to do is how do we resolve that?
Yes, and who gets to decide is a very important
Well,
issue.
why should you decide? That's what I'm saying.
Well, why should she decide
Because it's
either?
her life.
I'm not deciding.
Well,
I'm saying the
you're
person
promoting euthanasia, and all law enforces someone's morality. You see.
Are you not encouraging something?
All common
Helena?
law comes from moral values.
All right,
and so
I got
all
you,
law
Helena. But how do you respond to that?
So Dr. Ambrosini was in a wheelchair. I understand he was on a breathing machine. I understand that he couldn't feed himself. I understand that he was in incredible pain. I understand he had had 17 months of treatment. And he was a man that wanted to live. He had a 7-year-old son.
Desperately, he was
desperately
sitting where you
wanted to
were.
live. Yes. And he reached the end of his road. And I would like to live in a country that respects
Doctor, sorry, let me give Dr. Doctor, you've been very passionate. I want to ask you, how do you respond to someone like Dr. Ambrosini, who says, I've done everything. He even took drugs, he did alternative medicine, he tried absolutely everything. Yeah. I want to live. He sat here and said that. And then finally he got to a position. Would you deny him that right?
I would involve specialists and multidisciplinary expertise, because I think that's an exceptional patient, and we shouldn't use an exception to make a rule.
But what do you say about him? Do you think he was wrong to take his own life?
I wouldn't say wrong, it's the deed is done, but I would have gone into more detail about his depression. Do you know that only 10% of people have been psychiatrically evaluated who wanted to die? Only 10%. In other words, we misinterpret depression and say, oh, it's frustration. It's not frustration.
We're not talking about that. We're talking about the purpose. Anyway, I mean, unfortunately, I've been told, I appreciate that. We'll have to get you all back because I have run out of time, which is a pity, because this is a terribly important... Sorry, thank you. But I have to end. This is an exquisitely difficult question, and I suppose when we try to distill it to its essence, what we have seen is, leave all the practicalities aside. All laws have practical problems attached to them. What we've got here is a sense of a moral clash between those who believe on the autonomy of a person to be able to determine their own life, including death, as part of the essential core of dignity, and those who believe that there's a sanctity of life which in a sense trumps even that notion of autonomy. And you've got to be able to resolve that one way or another in order to resolve this question as to whether euthanasia should be justified in South Africa or not. How do you balance that? Judge for yourself. Goodbye.